We can always not do it and just give you a mug and leave.
Actually, I am actually quite busy.
Oh.
So, thanks. And good luck.
Hello, I'm Christopher Hope, the Telegraph's Associate Editor for Politics, and this is Chopper's Politics. Phew, what a week. It ended with an extraordinary bonfire of taxes by Kwasi Kwarteng, the biggest tax-cutting, let's call it a budget since 1972, and that's the IFS talking, not me. We now know what Trustnomics is, but how will Labour respond? Well, let's go and find out. Before that announcement came in Parliament on Friday, I spoke with two senior figures in Labour who know what's going on. Frontbencher Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, and Peter Mandelson, the architect of New Labour's triumphs in the 90s and early noughties. Peter Mandelson, welcome to Chopper's Politics. Great to have you on.
It's very nice to be with you.
Boris Johnson's gone.
Yes.
Liz Truss is in.
Yes.
Is that good news for your old party?
Oh, never underestimate your political opponent. I mean, she may be the fourth Tory Prime Minister in 6 years with absolutely no clear idea than her predecessors as to what she wants to do with or for the country. No mission, no plan, just a great splurge of taxpayers' money from Kwasi Kwarteng. But don't underestimate her, would be my view. She's going to fight with everything she's got to hold on to power, and there's still a formidable campaign team and machine behind them, so the Labour should be careful just not to sit back.
She's
and
gambling
relax.
on future growth, isn't she? That's what she's doing, and it's the kind of thing which the Tories attacked Labour for
Shall I tell
in
you
the
what
late
she's doing?
noughties.
Chris, shall I tell you what she's doing? You know, she's gambling on future growth. She's announcing that we are going to have 2.5%, but that is an announcement. It's not an achievement. So all her plans, her economic plans and her splurging and her tax cuts and her high borrowing, which are going to result in high interest rates, more inflation, a plummeting pound, and God knows what's going to happen to mortgage holders. It's a great splurge, it's a great gamble, as you say, and with almost no sort of consideration about where this is going to end up in 2-3 years' time. Shall I tell you what it reminds me of? Ted Heath and Anthony Barber in 1972, that famous dash for growth, that budget which triggered inflation, which sent the pound plummeting. We lost control of the public finances, borrowing went through the roof, and we had basically our economy, not least because it was coupled with another similar energy price shock in the 1970s, was wrecked. Now, careful what you wish for is what I would say to Liz Truss.
What is Labour's response to that? What is Labour's idea?
Well, you'll hear what Labour's response is. I didn't speak for the Labour Party. I'm not a front bench member of the Labour Party. You'll hear what they have to say. I really hope they will say this, that if you are going to borrow more, if you are going to push the envelope out, and if you're really going to take sort of risks with the finances, spend the money on something that is going to change our economic fundamentals, that's going to make a real structural difference to our economy over the long term. That's what I would like them to do. So, you invest in the energy and digital transitions that are going to transform our economy. You're going to invest in the technology-based new industries of the future. You're going to invest in the climate change program that the government says it still has, but I'm not sure whether they're genuinely committed to. Invest in people's skills. I invest in what is fundamental and will make a long-term difference to our economy, and not just sort of splurge everything.
Tipping
in the
money
short
into
term.
pockets.
Well, yeah, but what are they doing? They're giving people, well, some people,
Everyone gets a tax.
Tax cuts with one hand.
Everyone gets tax.
But they're taking it back with higher interest rates, more expensive mortgages, spiralling inflation. So, there are swings and roundabouts, and they know this, and they can't take the people for fools.
A year ago when you came on this podcast, you said you'd love to serve in a Keir Starmer government. How near are you to that goal? Are you helping Keir Starmer with his politics now?
Well, I try to help any of his team who want my help. I mean,
and are you?
I have been round this course on one or two occasions before, but I'm not actually playing the role for Keir Starmer that I played for Neil Kinnock, for Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. I think probably he or some of the people around him want to do it in their own way. That's fine. I'm absolutely relaxed, but I'm here with plenty of time on my hands to help them in any way they want.
And are you once a month doing a conference call with this team?
No, I don't do conference calls with his team, but I speak to members of his team who, when they call, when they ask, when they want to sort of chew the fat, I'm very happy to do so.
You said a year ago that he needed a good core team around him. Has he got that now?
Yes, he's got a good shadow cabinet team around him. I think the people that you're going to see at the party conference, Rachel Reeves, she's first-rate shadow chancellor. She really has got her head turned on the right way. She's got her feet on the ground. She's also ambitious for the country. Obviously, she's committed to the change agenda that Labour wants to bring in. I think that David Lammy, very good sense of what a foreign secretary needs to be. Yvette Cooper, the shadow home secretary, Wes Streeting, heard him on the radio this morning talking about the National Health Service. My God, he's good. So I think he's got a great front bench team.
It's in place. And why aren't they further ahead in the polls? Why are they only 10%, given the chaos in number 10 over the past year or so?
Well, you say only 10%? I mean, given where we've come from, I mean, we would have been very thankful for, 0.5% under our previous leader, Jeremy Corbyn. So we've come a long way. And I tell you this actually about him. I wondered when Keir Starmer became leader, he would really be able to do in one term what it took Neil Kinnock and Tony Blair 10 years. And actually, I think he's doing it. I think he's behind that sort of serious, down-to-earth exterior. Keir Starmer is a very uncompromisingly focused individual. I think he's absolutely determined to get the changes he wants, and he doesn't give up till he's got them. That's what we've seen over the last 2.5 years.
Do you worry that Labour's too concerned with the producer, not the consumer? By that I mean they seem to be siding themselves with striking workers, public sector workers wanting double-digit pay rises, and they seem to be ignoring the consumer, which is what I think Labour's triumph really in the 90s was to put itself on the side of homeowners, of taxpayers, of people worrying about public services and looking back at the state. And I think Labour aren't doing that yet.
Let me say two things about that. First of all, there are many groups of frontline workers who really helped us through the pandemic, by the way, but others who are really badly paid. They don't have industrial muscle. They know they can't just pursue endless disputes and take strike action. They don't do that. That's not what they're there to do. And they look around the economy and see in the private sector people getting pay rises of 6 or 7%, and they're being offered a desultory 1 or 2%. I think those are the people who, when you talk about producers who are producing real care, real services, doing real things day in, day out on which people depend, who we should support and demonstrate some solidarity with. And if they're pushed to a point of having to take action themselves through their trade unions, they're the sort of people that I think we should be supporting. But when it comes to the consumer, you're making a very, very good point. To win the next election decisively and well, the Labour Party has to get those centre ground voters, people who see Liz Truss taking the Tories off to the right, but people who are not ideologically of the left or ideologically of the right. They're centre ground people. What they want to see from the Labour Party is absolute, solid, dependable economic competence, and they want strong leadership shown from Keir Starmer and his front bench. And I think that what the Labour Party has got to realise is that when we were fighting for office in the 1990s, I mean, the lesson that you need to learn from New Labour is discipline, discipline, discipline. That we ran things, we were a very tight ship and things ran properly. We knew how to run a railway. And secondly, we were always remembering where the British people are rather than where some in our party would like them to be.
Where are they now, the British people?
I think it's possible that the British people are moving towards a conclusion, which I remember in 1979, the then Labour Prime Minister, Jim Callaghan, set out to a group of people around him. And he said, Jim Callaghan, in 1979, there are times, perhaps once every 30 years, when there is a sea change in politics. It then doesn't matter what you say or do as a government. There's a shift in what the public wants and what the public approves of. Now, I'm not counting my chickens, but, Callaghan thought there was such a change in 1979, which brought in Margaret Thatcher. The next sea change was about 30 years later in 1997, which brought in Tony Blair. I think it's likely that we're going to see another such sea change in 2024, when the public basically decides that the Conservatives have had their chance. They've had their time. The last decade has been an extraordinary roller coaster ride, with first austerity, which we're now told by Conservatives was excessive and unnecessary. My God, the damage that it created at the time. Then we had all the divisions and the deadlocks over Brexit. Then we had the pandemic. And now, since the pandemic, we've had the energy price shock as a result of the Ukraine war. I think what people are beginning to realise is that it's time the Tories were given a rest. Well, a lot of Conservatives say to me, they know that they don't deserve to win next time. And I think people are saying it's time, it's safe to give Labour, their turn to take the country forward. But that's a very important word, by the way. It's safe to vote Labour. People didn't feel that in 2019 under Jeremy Corbyn. Now, he's very firmly behind us now, and Keir Starmer has made it absolutely clear that he's not coming back. Good. Tick. But people need to be reminded from here to polling day that the Labour Party is a different Labour Party under Keir Starmer, and that it is now safe to vote for.
I've often thought that the Labour Party could repurpose that Saatchi advert from 79, Labour isn't working, to Britain isn't working. Because so many things, if you talk to anybody trying to access public services, it's so hard to see a GP, it's so hard to get a driving licence, you have to wait for weeks and months to get a passport. You're paying these taxes, but you're not getting anything really out of the system of benefit.
I think people say it every day, Britain's broken. Now, I don't like talking down the country. It's not my style, and especially after the last 2 weeks we've come through, where we've seen Britain at its absolute best. Just wonderful. It makes me a bit sorry, I have to say, that Liz Truss, in one of her first decisions as Prime Minister, has decided to shelve the idea for a recommissioning of Britannia. I've always had a rather sort of neutral stance on this, quite honestly.
But you scrapped it, Peter Mandelson, in October 97.
No, I most certainly did not scrap it.
You weren't in the government then? You were the cabinet office minister.
Well, if you want to know, I was in the government in the Cabinet Office. The Secretary of State for Defence, who had ministerial responsibility for it, was not told or consulted. It was announced in August via a briefing from the Chancellor's press secretary. And it caused a lot of disquiet at the time. But that was then. Now, I think people, to have a new Britannia named after the late Queen, the Elizabeth, it seems like a lot of money. It certainly shouldn't be taken out of the defence budget. They have other commitments to fulfil. But I think to shelve it, as the Liz Truss has done, without saying anything about it, without explaining, I don't like that approach.
I work in Parliament, as you know, as covering politics, writing a daily newsletter, which I'm sure you read, Peter Mandelson. I asked Labour MP yesterday what to ask you, and he said, "You're a successful businessman. You've done really well. You are, or I am. You are. I'm giving you his question.
Thank you.
We're in your office here near Bond Street.
In Global Counsel.
Global Counsel, very successful. Yeah. So why do you bother with politics? You've been there, you bought the T-shirt. You were a great success. You won 3 elections for the Labour Party, but you're still doing it, aren't you? You're on my podcast.
I am still doing it because I just care very deeply.
Yeah.
And I miss being able to make a difference. I miss being in government every single day. I'm not going to hide that from you. I just do. And I am so pleased the Labour Party's back where it needs to be.
You were in mourning, weren't you, for a period under Corbyn?
I certainly was under Corbyn, but we're now back in the mainstream, representing those essential values of the broad mass of people in this country. And the reason why I like Keir Starmer And the reason why I think he would make a very good Prime Minister is because I think he represents the best of British. I really do. I think he's hard-working, I think he's public-spirited, I think he's patriotic, and he'd fight as hard for your family as he would for his own. He would never let Britain down. You know, he would never make us look small on the international stage. And he's the sort of guy, he's been committed to public service all his life. He's the sort of guy who would go to bed worrying that he'd done enough to improve the country in the day that's gone, and then he'd jump out of bed the next day and think he could do better. That is the sort of person I like.
He passes the blink test, which is you blink and you can imagine him on the steps.
Well,
he's
number
not 10.
He's not very ideological, to be honest.
Is that his problem now, you see?
Well,
now,
I don't think so.
For some people, that's his problem.
I think he's more national than ideological. He thinks in national terms. He thinks about the country. He thinks, you know, what works, what's going to improve the lot of the overwhelming mass of people in this country. And, OK, there are some in my party who would like him to be more sort of, you know, left-wing in quotes. And he is on the centre-left in politics, as I am myself, as New Labour was. But above all, he is something else. There is something quintessentially British and public-spirited about him, which I like, and he works darn hard, and he brings the changes in the Labour Party, and I think he'd do the same for the country.
Just one final question. We're expecting maybe some strike action to be signalled by unions. What's your advice to Keir Starmer with any shadow ministers who may go on picket lines? You called for discipline there, didn't you?
Well, I think we've got to make clear again and again and again that the trade unions do their job and we in the Labour Party do ours. The front bench are not running industrial disputes on behalf of the trade unions any more than the trade unions and their leaders are dictating to our front bench what their views and policies are. We respect the trade unions and the role they have to play. As a government, we would want to work with the trade unions, not against the trade unions. But when I say the trade unions, I mean their members. Not some of the sort of cliques and left-wing factions who offer the leadership, which in my view is pretty unrepresentative of the members, taking them in a direction of disputes, which are perfectly legitimate disputes, but at some stage they've got to realise that they've got to be settled. And when you reach an end of a negotiation, you should put the outcome of the negotiation to your membership and give them the chance to vote on it. We're not seeing that in the case, for example, of the rail strike.
But should front benches be on the picket lines with?
No. I think we've seen enough of front benchers sort of, you know, playing to the gallery on picket lines. I wouldn't blame front benchers or Labour MPs in their own constituencies, showing their solidarity to care workers and others who are on the front line of public services, who are being paid miserable wages and deserve more.
And Peter Mandelson, finally, one tweet. In one tweet, what's your advice to Labour?
Be the change, be the agents of change, but remember that you're only going to bring about change in government if the broad swathe of centre-ground voters vote for you at the next election. Don't forget them. Don't lose touch. Make sure that your feet are firmly planted where you need the votes, and that's former Tory voters. This is not a tweet, by the way.
It's a thread.
Former Tory voters who we need to convince and persuade to cross the line back to Labour.
Peter Mandelson, thank you. Peter Mandelson there. And I'd be fascinated to hear what you think about what Lord Mandelson had to say. Please do email me, chopperspolitics@telegraph.co.uk, or tweet me. We're at Choppers Podcast. Now do stay with us, listeners. Coming up, I'll be joined by Lisa Nandy, the Shadow Secretary for State for Levelling Up, to talk trustonomics, patriotism, and whether she misses Michael Gove. Right after this.
It's painful to imagine that someone would ever have paperwork about child abuse and not do everything in their power to bring the abuser to justice. But I've been speaking to people who say that seems to have happened in the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Not only was he aware of the abuse, he had heard the confession of it.
My colleagues and I on the Telegraph investigations team have been gathering evidence for the best part of a year, but I don't think any of us were prepared for what we'd uncover.
You just wonder, what is going on here?
I'm Catherine Rushton, and this is Call Bethel, a new audio series from the Telegraph. Subscribe now, wherever you get podcasts.
Now from Labour's past to its present. Lisa Nandy was elected MP for Wigan in 2010, the same year as our Prime Minister Liz Truss. And as Labour's Shadow Levelling Up Secretary, she's appeared on this podcast a couple of times from her constituency in Wigan. But this week, she was in London, so I simply had to ask her to join me on my favourite bar stool at the Red Lion pub for a chat. Lisa Nandy, welcome to Choppers Politics. Great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. In person this time.
In person is amazing. Are you missing Michael Gove already? It's been 2 weeks. Are you having withdrawal symptoms?
Well, we'd heard quite a lot of Michael Gove over the last few years. So I think everyone, including Michael Gove, is probably taking a bit of a break from Michael Gove. Yeah. But I suppose one thing that I do miss about him is that there was very much a sort of drive and determination to deliver when he was in the post. And there was a very clear view that you didn't just have to deliver for the country, aggregate growth, but you had to deliver for people, their places and their lives.
Like in Wigan, where you live?
Yeah, just like in Wigan, where people have been clamouring for that for years. And we may have clashed a lot about how to achieve that, but there was a very clear sense that that's what he was in business to do, and that's what he'd been put there to do. That has completely gone in the last few weeks.
Has it? Because the goal was the same, wasn't it? Levelling up was what you were both trying to achieve in different ways.
Well, I mean, the government is still very committed to levelling up, but their version of levelling up is Singapore on sea, places like Wigan becoming places where very wealthy people can stash their cash, slash and burn, deregulate.
What's that from? That's the zones they're creating, you mean?
Yeah, so their big idea is these investment zones, which is not new. Osborne had enterprise zones. It's all being announced this week. It's already falling apart. There's no serious economist who thinks this will grow the economy. But the bigger issue is that for people in these zones, they're going to see people building all over their green belt. They're going to see very wealthy housing being built because we think all the affordable housing provision will go. What's the benefit for people in Wigan? I think none. So in a way, I do miss Michael Gove, because what I miss was that sense that you had to deliver not just to hit some aggregate figure that might help you win an election, but you had to deliver for people's lives.
He really cared, I think, Lisa.
He
said, you know what I mean? I think he cared. Would you agree with that? For a Tory?
I think if I'm really honest, what he cared most about was winning the election, and I think he's very good at sensing the mood of the country. Over the years, he's been this kind of this education secretary who shook up the system. Then he was the sort of compassionate justice secretary, if you remember, and then he cared about the environment, and then suddenly he was Mr. Levelling Up, caring about left behind places. I actually think what connects all of that is that he was good at reading the mood of the country.
You haven't written to him, sent him a text.
I did actually, and I messaged him when he detonated himself. I like to think that I saw him off, but a bit like Dominic Raab before him, I think he did it all by himself.
Did you reply?
Yeah. We've always had a very collegiate, very friendly relationship, and one of the things that has been really important about figures like Michael Gove being in government is that they may disagree. I think Liz Truss is like this as well, actually. They may disagree, but they'll engage in the argument.
And that's the point,
really
isn't
important.
It? And just briefly on the last 2 weeks, I mean, it's in our minds only from Monday. Did you ever meet the Queen? Did she come to Wigan when you were there?
No, I met Prince William many times because I used to work for Centrepoint, a homelessness charity that he is a patron of.
His mother was part of.
And his mum was a great champion of. She was really important for us. So never met the Queen herself, but I mean, obviously she's been an anchor for the country all through my life. And I think the absolute incredible contribution that she made, I think, is best summed up in the fact that you've got lifelong Republicans in this country who came out to pay their respects and to pay tribute because they recognised how important.
And she's Labour's Queen too, isn't she? Because people think of maybe the Conservatives have an ownership.
I think you could see it in the tribute that Keir paid, how much she meant to him personally. And you heard it in Theresa May and the lovely story that she told about dropping cheese on the floor and putting it back on a plate while the Queen was watching.
Keir's speech was amazing, actually, because he connected that person that we know from stamps and money to the individual person in the street in a way which Liz Truss didn't do, I thought.
I think that probably is true. I don't want to criticise. No. Liz Truss had a job to do, didn't she? She had to respond on behalf of the country. But actually, I think Keir caught that note on behalf of the country better.
Most definitely. Now, you've mentioned Liz Truss. How will you handle Trussonomics? It gives you a chance here, doesn't it? Because you can be completely different. The problem with Johnsonomics was it was quite similar to what Labour were doing, I think, or planning to do, which is spend money heavily in parts of the country that needed it. But Trussonomics is completely different. It gives you a chance.
Yeah, I mean, I never lamented the fact that there was some kind of consensus that began to form around levelling up under the last incarnation of the Tory party. I think, building a consensus around getting all places in this country working and getting the economy firing on all cylinders, I think that was a really, really important moment. That moment is gone, though, you're right. And it opens up very clear political water between us. In the end, the question is not about whether you want growth, because we all want growth. The question is about how you get that growth. And they think that you can do it by powering the economy using a small number of people in a handful of sectors in one small part of the country. We think everybody has to contribute. So, this thing about deregulating bankers' bonuses, it's become a big political row for obvious reasons about fairness.
It's symbolic, isn't it?
But it's bigger than that, because actually what they're saying is that you can continue with the economic model that we've tried for 4 decades and that has demonstrably failed a lot of people
with the rich
in this
getting
country.
richer and the poor getting poorer.
Yeah, and unleash the power of the City of London and then just redistribute whatever's left. The problem is there's not enough of the pie to redistribute because we've written off most people and most places. It's what economists liken to trying to fly a jet using only one engine. You look at Grimsby, for example, where they've got an amazing wind industry because when we were in government, the Regional Development Agency spotted the potential and put some state backing behind it, and then the market came and the private investment came. So now you've got kids powering the world from the Grimsby docks.
Engineers, right?
Yeah, and if you write off places outside of London and the South East, you're never going to get that. Grimsby is the windiest place in Europe,
I've got a
I've
better chance
discovered.
of winning the next election now with Liz Truss in charge. Boris Johnson was like a Blairite figure who was hard to get a handle on for a lot of people, apart from his personal life, and the way he ran number 10 was a chaotic disaster. But now you've got Liz Truss there, you've got a better chance.
I mean, I think that's up to people. I hate the idea that you can game out the next general election. Our job is to convince people that we're ready to serve. And this conference that we're about to go into, this Labour Party conference, we spent 2 years getting the Labour Party into a shape that people could understand that we are fit to govern this country. And 2 years ago, we had a mountain to climb. That's gone now. We fixed those internal problems. We're a party that is pulling together, looking out to the country. And the message that I'm taking into this conference is to the members, get ready. We ought to win the next general election. We've got our sights on number 10. And we're going to rebuild this country.
I worry about Labour that it seems to be on the side of the producer, not the consumer. So I can think back, because I'm old enough, thinking back to the Labour pledge cards, education, tough on crime, tough on the cause of crime. These things were aimed at people at home worrying about their lives, whereas Labour often appeared to side with striking workers and not the commuters who are upset by that. I mean, of course, that's a big number of people, striking workers, but it's a far vaster number of people affected by the strikes.
Yeah.
Why are you on the side of the producer, not the consumer?
I don't think it's a question of producer or consumer. And actually, to be really honest with you, as somebody who's always stood with our trade unionists, Wigan is a trade union town and it matters. But, 10 years ago, I went on an RMT picket line when the ticket office staff and station staff were on strike, and I didn't feel that the public was in a mood to hear it. The train service in the north is notoriously appalling and has been for a long time, underinvested, very expensive, very unreliable. And people were finding, they were really frustrated that there was another thing. I think maybe something about the pandemic has changed that, is that, these people who run our foundational economy suddenly came back into focus and we remembered how much it mattered. And, this summer, just thinking about the experience that people have had, the support for people who are saying we desperately need a pay rise, we're caring for your families but we can't afford to feed our own, we kept the public services going in a pandemic but now we're struggling to know how we're going to make ends meet at the end of the week or month. I think the public mood is we actually do have to get into a position where we can pay people properly and we can run our public services properly, and that's why this argument about growth is so important.
And you don't think that might be inflationary to support those double-digit pay rises for public sector workers might drive inflation up?
I mean, look, I think that it's an absolutely mad argument to get into, to say that we can't run a country in one of the wealthiest countries in the world where people can afford to feed their families. That's got to be a top political objective for any political party, but especially for the Labour Party. economy. Yeah. And I would have a lot more sympathy with that argument if the Tory government weren't going out backing huge pay rises for bosses. I mean, take the boss of BT, for example, awarded himself a 32% pay rise. He's now on about 3.5 million. And the government seems to think that's absolutely fine.
For shareholders, not the government,
because according to Liz Truss, these are the wealth creators. But actually, I say that the people who work for BT Openreach, they are the wealth creators. They're the ones who come out and keep our country going, and they ought to share in the proceeds of that wealth.
How would Labour grow the economy, Lisa Nandy?
We've got to get the economy firing on all cylinders. What does that mean? It means stop writing off most people and most places. I was talking to Andy Haldane the other day, who came in to do the Levelling Up white paper with Michael Gove and is now at the RSA. I think he puts it well when he says
economist.
That's right, yeah. And I think he puts it well when he says what you really need is obviously you need a national strategy, and Labour's strategy is around utilising a bit of smart state investment to get private investment into industries like clean energy. Hydrogen, for example, in Ellesmere Port is really taking off with a bit of help from government. You could really see us powering the world through the next century like we did through the last. Places like industrial and coastal towns really well placed to benefit. But then what you need is a proper programme of devolution, because you don't just need a national strategy, you need lots of local growth strategies. And that's why, although people are really struggling with the cost of everything at the moment, and that's forefront in most people's minds, the devolution conversation is not an add-on, because you've got to get decision making into the right hands so that you can get investment into the right places, get everybody contributing, and that's how you get the economy growing.
Do you worry that Keir isn't cutting through? You're 10 points ahead in the polls. Why aren't you twice that number, given the chaos in number 10?
I think people have got a lot on their minds at the moment. Most of my constituents are thinking a lot about how they're going to survive this winter. I think it is going to be the hardest winter that any of us can remember. It's not just energy costs, it's food prices, but there's also, something that's preoccupying me a lot, because I do the housing brief as well, is about the costs of housing, particularly for private renters and people who don't have assets, who are not going to be protected this winter. But I think people are very open to the message, and I think when they hear what we've got to say, I think there's a mood in this country that we can't go on like this. Everything feels like it's broken and that it's falling apart, and people are ready for a very fundamental
It feels like 92
change.
For you, not 97 to me.
When I first got elected in 2010, same time as Liz Truss, been an MP now for 12 years, and in the Ed Miliband years, we would say to people, look, things have got to change. He was trying to fundamentally reconfigure the system. I never really felt that people were particularly in a mood to hear it. Now people are telling us that things desperately need to change, and what they're hearing back from us is that we've heard it, we get it, and that we're going to deliver on it. Do we still have work to do to convince people? Of course we do, and we would never be complacent. We've been out of power for a long time. But if you look at what we're doing in parts of the country where we are in power, we're showing, whether it's Mark Drakeford in Wales or many of our metro mayors, Tracy Brabin, for example, who's using culture to regenerate places
Yorkshire.
like Bradford. I mean, it's really exciting stuff. And we're showing that we can do it, and we're showing that we can be trusted to
And Miliband's ideas of government policy, energy price cap.
I mean, it's amazing.
Which was socialist, according to George Osborne back in 2014, if you remember that.
It's incredible when you think of how far it's moved. But the reason that they've moved, the Tories have moved, is because they've had to move, because the country has moved. So I really think that we can do this. I think we can rebuild this country, and I think we can win people's trust to do it. But we'd never be complacent about it.
We went to strikes earlier. Will there be a general strike this winter?
I've got no idea. I mean, that it's a question for trade unionists and workers, not for me.
There could be an announcement on Monday, apparently.
But I think what is clear, and I obviously speak to my colleagues and friends in the trade union movement regularly, is that people don't want this. I've never met anybody who goes out on strike because they're excited.
You're not being paid.
You're not being paid, but it's also, it's things like, you often end up in a situation where you're feeling very under pressure, where you're being intimidated by management. And also, I remember when our porters and cleaners and administrators from my local hospital went out on strike. It is genuinely awful because it's not just a job, it's a vocation, and they couldn't care more about the people that they serve. That's why they do it. So, I hope not, and I think they hope not as well. And our job is to make sure that we're in Parliament, keeping the pressure upon the government to try and find a solution to some of these problems.
There won't be a clash on this at the conference, will there? There won't be a concern about it?
I don't think so, because actually I think that the mood of the members is very much that we've had 12 years of Tory government and the whole country feels like it's now falling apart. apart, and we've got to focus. We've got to focus on Downing Street. It's within our grasp to get hold of the levers of power in order to change this country, and that's what we're going into conference with a clear message to do.
And we've talked before in our interviews previously, Lisa Nandy, about patriotism. Will you be singing a national anthem at the conference?
Yeah, we're doing tributes to the Queen actually at the first day, the Sunday. So Keir will open with that, and we'll sing the national anthem. And
everyone should join in.
I think you and I have had this conversation before, but I've never understood how sections of the left can believe that somehow being proud of your country is not a Labour tradition. Being part of something bigger than yourself, by the strength of our common endeavour, we achieve more than we achieve alone.
It's the bunting test.
That is the core of our message. It's written on our pledge card.
It's your bunting test.
It's the bunting test. Are you having a street party for VE Day or not?
And just finally, why should Telegraph readers vote Labour?
I think really because in the end, most people can see that the country can't go on like this. And a lot of the concern, I think, from people who don't traditionally vote Labour about us in recent years has been, can we be trusted with people's money? It's their money and they haven't got a lot of it, as one woman said to me a few years ago, and they want to know that we would spend it wisely. If you look at what's happening in British politics right now, the people who are putting forward proposals that those with the broadest shoulders bear the greatest strain, sustainable plans for investment and growth, it's Labour, it's not the Tories. So, there is a moment here where I think it is in most people's interest to vote Labour, and my job for the next couple of years, or however long this lasts, this truss economics, whatever it's called, lasts, my job is to make sure that people feel that they can and that they've got a home in Labour and that they'd be extremely welcome.
Well, Lisa Nandy, thanks for joining us for the first time in the Red Lion pub. Great to have you on. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much.
Lisa Nandy there. Thank you to both my guests this week, Lisa Nandy and, of course, Peter Mandelson, Lord Mandelson. Thank you to the team behind the podcast, researcher Meg the Nanu, and of course the producers, Giles Gear and Louisa Wells. Most importantly of all, thank you to you for listening. If you enjoyed this podcast, please do leave us a rating and a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It really helps other people find this show. And for more Westminster insights straight into your email inbox every weekday, please do sign up to my daily Choppers Politics newsletter. The link to that is in the show notes to this episode. And do be sure to check out my weekly Peterborough Diary column out at 7 p.m. on Fridays online and in Saturday's Daily Telegraph. And remember, if you can, please do buy a copy of the Daily Telegraph. You won't regret it. Until next time though, cheerio!